Welcome to the Scary Basement, Jumpscare. Each month, me and my friend Mikey McCollor find ourselves suddenly and jarringly back in the horrifying, scary basement. And we're never ready for it. I'm Roxy Polk, and I was in the middle of cleaning my car, ordering new printer ink for my printer, and trying to find out where the heck I put that pen I keep constantly misplacing.
And I'm Mikey McCollor, and I was in the middle of learning about Polybius. Roxy, what a video game that Polybius is.
Yeah, it sure is something. Did you also know that in addition to being a video game, it is an urban legend video game, Mikey?
What?
Let me tell you, Mikey, and anybody listening at the door of the Scary Basement, the legend of Polybius, the cursed arcade cabinet.
Mm-hmm.
All right. A mysterious arcade cabinet appeared in several suburbs in Portland, Oregon in the year 1981. The game caused many who played it to become completely addicted, to the point where they would not sleep or eat. Lines that formed to play the machine would often result in fights over who would be able to play next. Then, one day, the machines were visited by men in black, who collected unknown data from the machines. The data tested responses to the game's psychoactive effects. Players suffered from unpleasant side effects after playing, such as hallucinations, seizures, amnesia, night terrors, and worst of all, insomnia. 1 month after its release in 1981, the Polybius cabinet disappeared without a trace. Player accounts of their time with the game said that the company who made it was called Sinneslotion, which is a word described by writer Brian During as a not quite idiomatic German word, basically meaning they just came up with and made up their own German word. It's not a real word that exists.
Well, it sounds like sinister.
Yes, and it is actually two words combined, which the two words themselves mean sense delete or possibly sensory deprivation. They're derived from the German words okay, I don't know German, so I apologize if I'm completely hecking this up for anybody who knows German.
Roxy, you promised me you would learn German.
For the podcast, I promised I would. Off screen.
All right, let's try it.
So it's Sine, I was probably wrong, which means senses, and lotion.
Lotion?
L-O with an umlaut, S-C-H-E-N.
Well, I like to use Sine lotion on my elbows. I think that helps keep them fresh and vibrant.
You got to moisturize your elbows. People often forget that, Mikey. Which means to extinguish or to delete. The name of the arcade cabinet itself, Polybius, is also the name of a classical Greek historian who was born in, get this, Mikey, Arcadia. Like an arcade.
It's a fact!
And Polybius is said that historians should never report on what they cannot verify with interviews from eyewitnesses. Famously said this.
Wait, hold on. So we've got people coming in to play this arcade game.
Yes.
And they're getting so addicted that they're having night terrors and they're beating the shit out of people who want to stop them from playing the arcade game.
Uh-huh.
And then we find out that this arcade game is named after a Greek philosopher who said, "Don't trust anything you can't verify."
Yes.
Scary.
The cabinet itself is like a black cabinet that just has the text Polybius. You've probably seen it since you've been looking it up as well, Mikey, I know. The type font logo, it's very simple. It's kind of like a pale sort of green outline. It's kind of reminiscent of early Game Boy screens in terms of color, in a way. But that's the only defining feature.
I'm looking it up right now. I want to see it. Because I was just looking up the words. Just reading.
Gotcha. Yeah. And I'm sure our lovely editor can insert it into the podcast.
Ooh.
The podcast listing on Podbean. So if any of you are listening and want to check that out and don't feel like just Googling the word Polybius, it'll be up there for you.
It is very scary.
And one of the things that fascinates me about this as well is Oregon, and Portland, Oregon specifically, has very few urban legends. So the fact that this is like an urban legend from the town I live in is like my home now and has been for collectively possibly 9 years or something, 8 years at this point. It was very cool, especially because it's video game related. And Mikey, we know that both you and I love video games. So
we're big video game people, and we think here's what I think is so interesting about this urban legend, which, Roxy, I think is real.
Of course. Men in Black coming to collect stuff? The government experimenting on unsuspecting citizens? Of course. Happens all the time.
I am liking the idea of Men in Black just like bending over the arcade cabinet and like trying to pry it open to get the quarters out. What's so interesting and I think kind of creepy about this game to me is this idea that we don't have a huge sample size for like the long-term effects of what something like video games are going to do to the human psyche. And I think the internet kind of plays into this too. We don't really know how this is going to change us. So like we are kind of making ourselves vulnerable to something we were maybe not naturally designed to do or know or experience by playing these video games.
Well, I think also, like, video games are essentially a vehicle for fun or relaxation or better your skills, be competitive, you know, maybe prove yourself or something. So the idea that this thing that is supposed to be recreational, that is supposed to be something you enjoy, no matter, like, what flavor of experience you're trying to get from it, could have some sort of sinister undertone and is trying to play you instead of have you play it, I think is kind of like a interesting concept to deal with, and is probably kind of one of the reasons that made this urban legend come about. And so there's like quite a few different like theories about the origin and analysis and stuff for like if this arcade cabinet existed ever at all, or was it a complete myth?
What I want to know is like how much is legend and how much is real? Like, do we think this cabinet actually existed?
So there were reports in the 80s of arcades and like gambling places being busted up because of actual crimes like gambling, money laundering type stuff. So there were people in law enforcement going into arcade places and kind of like arresting people, taking cabinets away. So I think that kind of contributed.
So people saw the cops going in and breaking up gambling that was going on like two dudes on a Donkey Kong machine. And they mistook that for the Men in Black coming to collect data on the human psyche.
So there's like part of that. Then there was reports of like people getting sick after playing video games. I think in a couple of these cases, people were either like sick beforehand or like had particular conditions. You know, if somebody was sensitive to flashing lights and played a game like that and they had a seizure or something, people wouldn't think, oh, they had that predisposition to be affected by that. It's like, oh no, the machine is cursed. And the cursed machine did it to them, and it's a government conspiracy.
Well, that's kind of like the way that like religion gets started. Like the sun rises and then it's like, well, what else could it be besides a god? And then we learn a little bit about how science works and we're like, oh, got it. It was just neurons firing in their brain differently than they do in neurotypical people.
Yeah, and the thing is, too, this supposedly, like, took place in 81, but people weren't even talking about it existing until, like, the 90s.
Oh, it takes that long for information to leak out.
Sure, of course, yeah, from the government conspiracy websites. So it's like people talking on the internet. There were some people who claim, like, oh, yeah, I played the machine or I programmed the machine. Like, all these people coming out of the woodwork online that were continuously debunked to be like, no, you didn't. No, you didn't. Everybody knows you didn't do that. And to the point that also people more modernly have recreated the cabinet, you know, it's been featured in different, like actually this season 1 of Loki featured it. And I even yelled about it on my Twitter that was like, oh, what? The Polybius machine. Yeah. That's so funny that it ended up in like the Loki reject stuff that got pruned from regular timelines. That was a funny little thing.
A long time ago, I remember seeing the Polybius arcade game pop up on The Simpsons.
Oh, yes, that's right. It was in The Simpsons as well. Yeah.
They just stick it in there. It's such a cool, like, little detail to have whenever you have an arcade scene. You're like, just put a Polybius reference in there.
Yeah.
We horror nerds are craving it.
It's so much fun. Yeah, people have recreated the cabinet. There's been, you know, talk about what the actual gameplay was like if this did, in fact, exist. It's kind of like...
That's what I'm wondering. What kind of game would it be that would suck us in that much?
It's got kind of like this strobing effect where you're like shooting stuff kind of down a corridor. I mean, again, this is people theorizing and people recreating what they think it was like. Okay, in 2007, like somebody made a PC game called Polybius, and then more recently, somebody made a Polybius game in 2017 for like PlayStation 4.
Oh.
That was also a VR game, so it was supposed to be kind of even more like in on the urban legend to like kind of, I guess, manipulate or encompass your psyche or like your perspective when you're playing it.
That rules.
They were like, you know, inspired by the urban legends. Let's see, the one in 2007 was a 2D shooter kind of resembling the game Star Castle.
Okay, I'm Googling Star Castle right now because
Yeah.
I gotta know what kind of game we're playing that is giving such good information. Oh, I see it. It looks almost a little like Geometry Wars, I guess?
Yeah,
Okay.
that'd be a good way to describe it too. It's kind of like on this dark background with just very simple lines, like kind of outlining the space you're in and moving through. It looks very basic, which is why it's supposed to be so sinister, I guess.
Sure.
Warp
Here,
your
listen.
mind.
I'll tell you, I worked at GameStop when the Xbox 360 first came out, and Geometry Wars was like the system seller for that console when it first was out.
Are you kidding?
No, that game ruled. We had a little display at GameStop to play Geometry Wars, and it was hard not to play it.
It's so addicted, Mikey. It was drawing you in with its psychotropic
My
gameplay.
district manager did come in a lot and take what could only be thought of as data from the machine, and we never saw him unless he was coming in to collect data from the Xbox 360. And he did tell us he worked for the government.
Oh, well, in that case. And speaking of the government, so another like tie-in too is the MK Ultra experiments.
Yeah, let's talk about these.
So MK Ultra experiments were real things that happened, like real things the government did that were absolute horror shows. There'd be things like sleep deprivation, see what that does to a person. Give people LSD, see what that does. Stuff like that would like alter your brain, either brain chemistry or brain reaction time, whatever, that like kind of fed into this to be like, oh yeah, the government could be trying to, you know, just experiment with people on the street and see what would happen. And I think also there was a early game around this time period that was made for the government that was like training people how to use tanks and like simulate tank battles and stuff. So it's like
it was called Worms.
Yeah, there you go. Worms Armageddon for the Dreamcast. And so I think there was also this, you know, people knowing that the government did make a training video game or commissioned one. I don't know. And these experiments with MK Ultra where they literally experimented on people. Sometimes people were not exactly clued in on what the hell the experiment was and what was going to be done to them before they signed on to it.
Why would they be?
Yeah, exactly right.
Human beings don't deserve to know what's happening to their brain.
It's part of the mystery. So I think like stuff like that served to further kind of cement this idea that it was the government experimenting on people, I guess.
I think I know what I feel like is the great big idea of this, like the horrible, frightening, bones deep horror of the concept of Polybius being real and taking advantage of. But do you have any thoughts what you think is so frightening about this idea?
Well, I think the idea that, like I said before, like you think you're playing a game for recreation or under your own power when really it's stripping away your power, stripping away your intent and using it to its own ends. That's pretty terrifying, that concept, which I think is one of the reasons why it's so addictive too, because it is like a mysterious thing where, oh, it just appeared one day and then it was gone as well. So it feels very ephemeral and like it was targeting only select places, I guess, too. Or
what was about those places that make them so susceptible to experiments?
Yeah, exactly.
Sweet.
Or is it just, you know, Portland in the 80s wasn't a big blip on anybody's map, so maybe it was like, oh, just go into any small town or like small city in America and try and do that because you can get away with it because no one is monitoring you or watching you.
Yeah, who cares about Portland? It's things are just happening there and nobody can tell why or what. There's fucking Cthulhu's running around.
I mean, yeah, I would know. You know, the 80s were a little slower. Cthulhu's here now, but he wasn't there back then. He didn't put the place on the map back then.
And, you know, Roxy, I'll tell you why my brain immediately jumped to Cthulhu for the specific, because to me, what I think is so frightening about this is kind of the same thing that's so frightening about H.P. Lovecraft stories.
Oh?
It's sort of this idea that if the government wanted to do something to mess with our brains, it could. I don't think that's true necessarily.
No recourse.
But exactly. They are such a giant, powerful entity. They are so far above us that if they decide to fuck with us, there's absolutely nothing we can do. And to look into that is to drive yourself mad.
Yes. Yeah, that's a actually pretty interesting and also terrifying way to describe that.
Yeah.
And how it feels. I
say this a lot. I have friends who kind of fell down a conspiracy hole.
Okay.
And this fear that the government is more powerful than it really is. And the story I always tell them is why I don't necessarily feel that freaked out, but like the idea is frightening, but like The notion that the government is pulling off secret conspiracies that we will never hear about kind of doesn't track for me, because this is something that happened when John Kennedy was shot in Dallas.
Okay.
And they got a casket for him that they were going to then take to Washington to bury him in Washington. And the casket that they bought was too big to fit on the plane.
Oh my God. Okay.
So they actually had to saw the handles off of John Kennedy's casket to get him on the plane back to Washington. Like, our government is inept. These people are stupid. They can, it's not to say they wouldn't try an experiment like this, but I feel like it's less of a concern to me that this would get out. There would be mistakes made. Somebody would reveal it. It would be leaked.
There's too many moving parts, and it's human error. And also just, there's so many basic things our government can't handle that would be very necessary that, like, the fact that the idea that they could do this for some reason and pull it off seamlessly and nobody knows, like, yes, they're not, they don't have a great track record of being able to make stuff like that happen. And I think the example you gave is just one of many that we could point to be like, they're not, it would be scary if they were actually like on their shit and in control of things. And part of why it is more scary in some ways is that a lot of very careless and horrifying things do happen as a cause of them not being on top of things or not really considering who they are in charge of.
But I think that's what, even thinking about, like, if the government was that powerful and was putting Polybius machines out there, it's like, it's so far beyond the scope of my ability to change things or to not fall victim to it. That it's just like, all right, if that's going to happen, it's going to happen. It's kind of why the thought of H.P. Lovecraft monsters don't freak me out that much, because I think at the very least, this is my brain doing protection work for my heart right now.
Okay.
If a Cthulhu is going to rise out of the ocean, like, all right, there's nothing I can do about that. There's no worry. There's no reason to be worried about it now. Yeah, it's over and great. And I love you all. And I'm finally going to make out with everyone I've ever had a crush on. Who cares? Who cares?
It's Mikey's afterlife.
No, that's my, like, the world's gonna end in 20 minutes. I'm just calling up people like, do you want to make out? And then they say yes or no.
They're like, but it'll take me 20 minutes to get to you, and then Cthulhu will have killed me by then. No.
Right, yeah. Everybody within a 19-minute radius of me is getting made out with. If they want, to be clear.
Of course. I mean, you'd be calling them to come to you, so they wouldn't if they didn't want to, right? Got 19 minutes, make it count.
Roxy, I got a question for you.
Okay, Mikey, what is your question for me?
Roxy, what video game do you think is most likely to be a continuation of the Polybius project?
I would say that this is probably like the least covert experiment, because I think hiding it in plain sight and being like, this is the most popular game ever. Don't you want to play it? Don't you want to be conditioned to want to play this game from a child onwards? Would be Fortnite. So many children have been inducted into the cult of Fortnite, play Fortnite all the time. So many adults. I've played Fortnite. My brother loves Fortnite.
People like Fortnite.
It conditions you to like want to play it all the time. Be like, one more round. Where if they wanted to subvert the fun times you're having there to implant like, secret government messages to make you, I don't know, sign up for the army, whatever they want you to do, they could totally do that, especially because it has such a wide range of people. And it has like this colorful, poppy, kind of like addictive gameplay experience that it would be very easy to do.
I feel like the second they add VR headsets to war,
okay,
and they can make a soldier look like he's in Fortnite, but he's shooting at enemy combatants, folks, I'm not looking forward to that.
That's the future the metaverse wants from us, Mikey.
That's the future the metaverse wants.
And then also Facebook owns it and make money off of it. So there you go.
Good. Facebook deserves it.
Everybody wins.
The video game, I think, is probably a continuation of Polybius. I gotta say Death Stranding.
Okay. All right. I can see that, I think, but I'd like you to elaborate.
Death Stranding is such a weird game. It's such a, like, it's, you play as a mailman walking across the desert.
You gotta balance your shoes, how they give you blisters, and you gotta swap out your shoes and make sure your weight distribution doesn't make you fall over.
It's such a weird, insane game.
Dystopia.
that like it has to be a government experiment. It's so weird. It's so designed to like maybe not even so much government, but to create in us this line of thinking that like, oh yeah, we are slaves to capitalism. We must walk and grind ourselves to dust if we are to survive in this already post-apocalyptic world.
Well, also, when that game was made, it was before the pandemic, and the whole deal with, like, the world there is the rain, like, is toxic. It makes you age super fast, right? So you, like, just die.
Right.
So everybody is isolated and indoors, and that's why your main character is wearing, like, a full rain suit and carrying around heavy shit and delivering things to people who are all in isolation in isolated areas.
Damn, wild what that movie got right.
Movie?
What did I say?
You said movie. Yeah. So I think, like, it's already happening. Mikey, Death Stranding is literally happening.
Yeah, good. And we're ready for it now because of the government.
Yep.
Roxy, on a scale from 1 to 9, 1 being the least likely, 9 being the most likely, and not 10 because 10 does not exist in the scary basement, how likely do you think the Polybius myth is to be real?
Well, I said 8 out of 9 for the government doing experiments on unsuspecting citizens, because that has literally happened many times. But I'd say Polybius itself, the arcade cabinet, and the urban legend, I don't think it happened. Sadly, it's a cool thing to think about, but I don't think it happened, so I'm docking 1 point.
Sure. I was going to say 5.
Okay.
Like, over
So in the
halfway,
middle.
because kind of for the same reason, like I do think, of course, the United States is pulling off experiments on people and they're doing this and it's fine. The idea that they would make it a video game, which I think would be really effective, is what makes me think it's so much less likely. The fact that they would be good at it, I think is probably not the case.
I think that is a good angle to take. Yeah, totally makes sense. So that was Polybius, Mikey. Do you feel like you have learned a lot about urban legends and about my town?
Yeah, I feel like I've spent a good 20 minutes in Portland.
Yeah. Now you know all about it.
Being scared. I've been to Portland a couple of times. I don't think I've ever felt the emotion of fear while I was there.
It's not a very scary town, I'd say, from my experience. So.
And now the episode is over. Jumpscare!